Thank you so much for giving us this time to come forward and share with you our thoughts on term limits and the idea to let the people vote in Newport Beach and Costa Mesa. I'm Leslie Bubb. This is Michael Schwarzman, and Amy Peters is in Colorado, so she couldn't be here. She's with us on this as well. So term limits is not a new idea. In March of 2007, Mrs. Yelsey was talked about in this article where she advocated setting term limits for Newport Mesa trustees during her campaign, and she had submitted a proposal to the board asking that members be limited to 12 years or less. It was also mentioned in this article that her campaign cost more than $38,000, and she was moved to ask for term limits, she said, because she wanted to provide a chance to candidates who didn't have her resources. And I understand how challenging it can be to raise money. So, 7 years later, Mrs. Fleur, who was on the board, did a presentation on term limits, and she was quoted saying this was a request regarding term limits for the Board of Education, and this came from a community member. So in her presentation, she talked about the 2013 election results, which shows the power of the incumbent. She mentioned that 52 incumbents ran for office, and of those, 42 won their race with a success rate of 80.7%. She then went on to share the 2014 Orange County results. 28 seats available, 23 incumbents sought re-election, 21 of those won with a 92.3 incumbent success rate. Mrs. Fleur's findings support how statistically challenging it is to run against an incumbent, coupled with Mrs. Yelsey's recognition that it can be financially burdensome to the challengers. So what were the results? The results of that presentation, there was no action or discussion that took place. Instead, after the presentation, Mrs. Fleur stated, "This is just information, so we don't have to take any action but food for thought." After her presentation, the district's attorney came up and gave his presentation on it, and he finished by stating, "I learned quite a lot," he was referring to Mrs. Fleur's presentation, "I learned quite a lot of things, as well as it also shows the power of the incumbency." So let's take a look at the problem with habitual incumbents. Boards need new blood, energy, and perhaps most important, perspective and ideas if they want their organizations to flourish. One example that I want to bring up when I look at this is perspective. 2 weeks ago, I was here when they did a study session on SWAN math, and I really was just here as an observer just to learn and listen. And the district statistics guy came up and he had a slide on 5 of the schools and where they were with their proficiencies in math. And the highest proficiency rate had a 65% proficiency rate, and the lowest of those 5 schools he had showed was 49%. And for me, as a person sitting in the audience, the one thing that I was struck with was why was no one talking about how sad it was that our proficiency rates in math are so low. And it sort of begs this idea that when you have people who've been around and maybe heard those numbers for so long, that they don't have that impact anymore, and that when you have new board members on board, they have a chance to be able to really sit back and say, whoa, let's look at the bigger picture. Besides just looking at SWAN math, let's take a look at what's really hurting our kids. Another problem with habitual incumbents is that we're looking at innovation shifts the paradigm. The best practices in 2016 didn't exist when we were students. There's also this, we've tried that before. Trying something 10 years before is not the same as trying it today, when neither the organization nor the environment in which it's operating should be the same. And lastly, boards populated by individuals who have institutional memory to remember what was tried or dismissed without trying 10, 15, 30 years ago hold organizations back. So let's take a look at institutional memory. This usually is an argument to keep a person in a position. Institutional memory should never reside in the memory of one or even several board members. Instead, institutional history should be documented in a format that is easily shared with others. Institutional memory is more often than not used to hold organizations back, not to propel them forward. I have had first-hand experience with this.